So what are the actual expectations of this course? Well, there will be weekly discussion topics. I will post the prompt on Mondays and they'll be due on the following Sundays. There'll be 2 response papers due throughout the course of the semester, and I'll post those prompts as time permits. And then finally, the big uh, grade assignments will be the 2 midterms, which are 20% each, and then the final exam, which will be 25%. And all the due dates and assignment details are listed in the syllabus. So first and foremost, you need to read the syllabus if you haven't already. So what are we actually going to be talking about in this course? Well, first, let me discuss what this course will not be. I am not going to sit here and tell you, oh, the Democrats are bad and the Republicans are good, or Joe Biden is good and Donald Trump is bad, or vice versa. I'm not here to tell you who the good guys are, the bad guys are. We are going to discuss why politicians and political parties behave the way they do, and why they think the way they think. All right, nor am I going to tell you where to get your information, your political news. I'm not going to tell you that, oh, you should watch Fox News, or that you shouldn't watch Fox News, or MSNBC, or any of the other news outlets. Now, we might talk about why certain news outlets report the news the way they do, and why certain news outlets do have partisan and ideological leanings. There's not necessarily anything wrong with watching media or news outlets that do have partisan leans or partisan bias. But one of the things we are going to talk about in this course is how important it is in order to spot bias when you see it. So what will this course be about? Well, it's going to be about why people do the things that they do when it comes to American politics. Why do people behave the way they do? Why do people think the way they do? We are going to discuss with a critical eye why American politics exists in its current state. Why do people vote in some elections but not others? Why is it in some elections the Republicans will be ahead and in other elections the Democrats will be ahead? And we're going to talk about that in the context of the American presidential election coming up. We'll also talk about elite behaviors. Why do legislators, senators, congressmen vote the way they do? Why is it that in response to the COVID pandemic, different states responded differently to the COVID-19 outbreak? We're going to discuss why that is. For example, in some states, essential businesses were the only businesses that were allowed to open, but what constituted an essential business varied depending on the state. One of my favorite examples is that in Texas, liquor stores were considered to be essential businesses, but in other states they were not. In Colorado, where marijuana is legal, marijuana dispensaries were considered to be essential businesses. So we're going to talk about why, unlike other countries, which engaged in a national response to the pandemic, the United States went a different direction. They went in a state-by-state approach. Now, there are certainly arguments for why that might not be the right approach and arguments for why that was the correct approach. But we're not necessarily going to talk about things in terms of right and wrong, but rather, why do we go about doing things in this way? So let's start off with some fundamentals. What actually is politics? What is political science? Why do we study it? Well, Harold Lasswell, a famed political scientist, once described politics as a simple matter of who gets what, where, and when. Well, maybe. But I think we should dig a little bit further. After all, economics is in many ways a game of who gets what, when, and where. The idea being that it's all about an exchange of goods and services. Now, how is that different from politics? Well, it's different from politics in a couple of ways. If I give you, $1,000. Perhaps you give me a laptop. If I give you $10, you give me a book, something like that. It's all about an even exchange in which both parties benefit. How is that different from politics? Well, politics is first and foremost about power. That is the first rule of this course. Politics is about power. And almost as important, it's often viewed as zero sum. If I have power, that means you don't. If I won an election, that means you lost an election. And what differentiates this from economics even further is that fairness need not be an issue. In economics, if I get something, I have to give you something in return. In politics, if I get something from you and you get nothing in return, so be it. As a matter of fact, that's better for me. Fairness is not an issue. Now, why do people want power? Well, to implement an agenda, perhaps. Sometimes it's an ideological one, but not always. You might want to impose a morality or philosophy on others. You might have some financial incentives, but those aren't quite as common as what people think, and we're going to discuss that even further. And finally, why do we study American politics? The United States isn't the only country that has politics. There are Canadian politics, Mexican politics, European politics. Well, though my friends and colleagues that study the politics of those countries might bristle at this, I am going to argue that there are several reasons why American politics is essential to study, perhaps in a very special way. The obvious why you are interested in studying American politics is that we're here. We live in the United States. Many concepts in political science generally come from the study of American politics. And even more interesting from a social scientific point of view is that because we have a federalist system in which there's a national government but also 50 state governments, it provides multiple cases to study to figure out if a policy implementation in one state worked, will it work in another? We're going to talk about the nature of federalism and the various pros and cons of that later on. There's a unique emphasis on individualism compared to other countries in the United States. Politics is ultimately the study of the relationship between the citizen and the state. And given that there's such a unique emphasis in the United States on the individual and individualism, makes for an interesting place to study how political dynamics play out. And then finally, the study of American politics can provide context for current events. You can't really know or understand what's going on right now unless you know the history behind it. I'm going to make the argument in this course that federalism plays a huge role in American politics. As a matter of fact, it infiltrates almost every aspect of it. And you don't need to be a political science major in order to find this information useful. Our participation, or lack thereof, has consequences on society at large, and we're going to talk about what those consequences are. So what do you need to prep for week 1? Well, we're going to begin at the beginning. We're going to study sort of the abstract concepts of what are politics, what is government here the rest of this week. And then we're going to move into the study of the US Constitution and constitutionalism in the United States, exploring the relationship between citizen and government, the causes and consequences of a federalist form of government. And like I said, I'm going to be really digging into federalism and how that has dictated American politics ever since the beginning. So do the readings, make sure that you contribute to the discussion boards, and then if you have any questions, feel free to email me.